Hello students, today we are going to explain the last topic from the animal ecology, that is animal interactions. So first we'll explain regarding its introduction. So ecology is a branch of science that deals with the study of distribution and the abundance of an organism in the ecosystem and also their interactions or interrelationship with the environment. So this is just the definition of the ecology. So ecology is a branch of science and it deals with the study of distribution and the abundance of an organism in the ecosystem and also their interactions or the interrelationship with the surrounding environment. The environment includes both abiotic, that is physical factors, and biotic, that is biological or living factors. So the environment is composed of both biotic and abiotic factors, that is living and non-living factors. Physical factors or non-living factors are nutrients, carbon dioxide, water, and the critical factors such as the temperature, wind, pH, etc. So these are the abiotic factors or the physical factors of the environment which are essential for the growth and survival of the living entities or biotic factors. So these factors change the species composition. Since the living organism needs these physical factors or the abiotic factors, ultimately there is an influence of these physical factors on the composition of the species or the living organisms. So this ultimately influences the species composition in the environment. So these physical factors are responsible for the change of the species composition. While biotic factors includes or the living factors includes organisms, organic molecules and cells are most diverse. So biotic factors are the living organisms which are composed of the organic molecules and the cells and which are of uh, different types or are most diverse and easily changeable part of the ecosystem. So the living organisms are continuously changing. The species diversity or the living organisms, that is plants, animals or the microorganisms which are composed of organic material or the organic molecules or the cells, and these are continuously changing. So this is the changeable part of the ecosystems since all living organisms in an ecosystem are interdependent. Since the all living organisms, that is plants, animals or the microorganisms which forms the living factors of the ecosystem and are interdependent on one another for their growth or survival in the environment. The associations or the relationships existing between the different organisms in the ecosystem influences or affects the survival of organisms and the entire functioning of the ecosystem. So the whatever the interactions or the associations or the relationship between the living and non-living factors or all the living organisms with their surrounding environment will influence or affect the survival of the organisms as well as the entire functioning of the ecosystem in the environment. So the associations existing between different organisms or different species of organisms in the ecosystem influences or affects the survival of all the living organisms and the entire functioning or the ecological niche and the entire functioning or the ecological niche of the particular ecosystem. Animal interact with each other. Animals interact with each other in a numerous and the complex ways. So there are different type of complex interactions. There are different type of complex interactions happening or occurring between the animals, and there are various types of interactions between different species. There are various type of interactions between different species, then most of the involved resources and the consumers. So whatever the abiotic factors or the respective habitat representing the resources. So there are various type of interactions between the different species of the living organisms, including plants, animals, and microorganisms, together with the interactions which are occurring even with the sources or the resources, most of the involved resources and the consumers. So the physical environment is also playing great role. The physical environment or the different resources or the habitats with respect to uh, land or the water or the atmosphere also serves as a physical environment or the important part of the ecosystem, and which is also important for the growth and survival of the different organisms or all living organisms. uh, with respect to their interactions, that is plants, animals, or microorganisms, they are interacting with one another together with the surrounding physical environment, that is representing the various involved resources in the form of habitat or maybe the food or the consumers. So there are various types of interactions between different species, then most of the involved resources and the consumers. So the interactions between the different species, then most of the involved resources and the consumers which are having their interactions with one another. So that is living and non-living factors of the environment also getting involved in the different type of interactions between them. Then a resource. What is a resource? So we'll define the actual meaning of the resource and the consumer. So a resource in the ecological terms or in an ecological meaning, such as food, water, habitat, sunlight, or the prey, which is required for the organisms to perform a vital functions such as growth or reproduction. So, a resource means these are the different type of requirements or the different type of requirements or the needs or the different the materials. These are the different materials present in the physical environment. In the ecological terms, a resource means a source of food or a food, then water, then habitat, that is a space for living, then sunlight or a prey which is required or essential for the organisms to perform vital functions such as growth and reproduction. So resource means whatever the requirements of the organisms that are satisfied from the physical or biotic or abiotic environment. That is both physical and living environment, physical or living environment, that is biotic and abiotic factors of the environment, both are essential for the growth of living organisms as a resource. So, a resource in the ecological terms or in the ecological meaning, such as food, water, habitat, sunlight, or the prey, which is essential for the organisms to perform a vital functions such as growth and reproduction. Then consumer. A consumer is an organism that consumes or use a resource. The consumers are the organisms. A consumer is an organism that consumes a resource such as predators, herbivores, and the detritivores. So these are the different category of the organisms or the animals which are having different type of feeding habits. So on the basis of feeding habit on the basis of feeding habit of an organism. There are three categories of the consumers, such as predators, herbivores, and the detritivores. Or predators can also be called as a carnivores. So resource means the resources which are used by the different animals for the uh, requirement for their requirement as a food or water or a habitat or the sunlight or the prey, and which is essential for their growth and reproduction so as to perform different vital functions in the living organism. So a resource is the materials. Resource is a material or the various components of the environment. A resource means these are the different type of materials, either living materials or organic materials or the inorganic materials, and these may be a part of living factors or a non-living factors or the various components of the environment representing a resource, and that is used by the living organisms for their growth or survival and the reproduction. And a consumer is an organism or the animals which consumes a resource or which use a resource, such as the predators or carnivores, then herbivores and the detritivores, and most of the interactions between the animals involve one or more competitor species so as to get resources. So among the resource and the consumer, among the resource and the consumer. So these are the two important uh, components. These are the two important components of the environment and which shows the interactions. So most of the interactions between the animals involve one or more competitor species so as to get the resources. Means so as to get the resources in the form of food, water, habitat, or the sunlight or the prey organism. The living among the animals, there are more number of animal species in the form of living entity in the environment, and which get involved in the interaction, which get involved in the different type of interactions between the resource and the consumer, where there is a involvement of one or more competitor species. So most of the interactions between the animals involve one or more competitor species, one or more competitor species so as to get the resources from the environment. So this is about the introduction regarding the definition of the ecology or the different components of the environment, that is biotic and abiotic factors, and also how the biotic and abiotic factors are interdependent or interrelated with one another, or how there are some sort of interactions, how there are some type of interactions taking place between the resource and the consumer or living and non-living entities of the environment, and animals which are showing variable type of interactions among them uh, for their survival or growth and the reproduction, and there may be a competition for the so as to get the particular resource, maybe a food or a habitat or the water. So as to get the resource, there may be a competition between the different species in the ecosystem. So most of the interactions between the animals involve the one or more competitor species so as to get the resources. Then we'll explain different types of animal interactions. Types of animal interaction. So species interaction or the animal interactions. Species interaction or the animal interactions can be divided into four basic types. the animal interactions or the species interactions can be categorized or subdivided into four basic types based on how the participating species are affected by the interaction. So, on the basis of interaction, on the basis of interactions between the participating species, how the interactions affecting the participating species. So, on that basis, there are four types of animal interactions. So, species or animal interactions can be divided into four basic types based on how the participating species are affected, how the participating species are affected due to the different type of interactions such as competitive interactions, consumer resource interaction, then detritus or detritus interaction, and fourth one mutualistic interactions. So on the basis of how the participating species are affected due to the interaction, there are four type of animal interaction. One, that is competitive interaction. Second, consumer resource interactions. Then third, detritus or detritus interactions. And fourth, that is mutualistic interactions. So there are four type of animal interactions uh, observed in the environment or in the ecosystem on the basis of how the participating species or interacting species are affected due to the interaction. So first we will explain the first type of animal interaction, that is competitive interactions. Competitive interactions. So this is uh, just simply the meaning of the competitive interaction, that is a competition. So this is a competition type of interaction. Competitive interactions where there is a sort of competition between the participating species in the ecosystem. So competitive interactions are the interactions involving two or more species that are sharing for the same resource, that are sharing or using the same resource, might be for food purpose or as a living space, or as a living space. So competition reactions or competition interactions are the interactions in which two or more species can be involved and which are sharing or utilizing the same resource. When the competing species or the animal species which are interacting with one or another or more number of species, they shows the competition. So competitive interactions are the interactions involving two or more species which are sharing or using the same resource, might be a food resource or the habitat or a space for the living. In these interactions, both the species involved are negatively affected. Means there is a adverse effect or the harmful effect on both the participating species. So in these interactions, both of the species involved are negatively affected. Competitive interactions are may be indirect. Competitive interactions may be direct or indirect. Competitive interactions may be indirect, such as when two species both consume the same food or a resource, when the two species of the animals or the interacting animals uses the same resource or the same type of food, when both the species or two species consume the same resource or a same type of food but do not directly interact with each other, but do not directly interact with each other, instead they affect each other. Instead of affecting directly one another, they interact indirectly or they are having a negative impact indirectly, and this is due to they affect each other by reducing the availability of the food resource. Means there are both the species of the organism which are consuming or using the same food resource, but they use the particular food resource indirectly. Means due to this what happens, ultimately the food resource is exhausted, the food resource is exhausted or finished, and due to this, means the two organisms of the interactions, two organisms competitive interactions between the two species, both the species of the participating organisms or the species using the same food resource but not directly interacting with each other, and both of the species uh, are negatively affected. Instead, they affect each other by reducing the availability of the food resource. For example, the interaction between lions and hyena. For example, the interaction between lions and hyena, both are carnivores. Lions and hyenas both are carnivores since both species feed on same prey. Since both the species, that is lion and hyena, feeding on to the same prey or same food organism, they negatively affect each other. They negatively affect each other by reducing the amount of that prey. Means one species may have trouble for the hunting in an area where the other is already present. So in this case what happens, suppose in a particular ecosystem or in a particular place or area where the respective type of food organism or the prey is present, if there is a lion which is present already in the particular spot, so this will become a problem for the hyenas. So whenever there is one predator present in the particular area or in the particular place where the food organism or the prey is present, so one species may have trouble for hunting in an area where the other is already present. So they are competing with one another for the same food source. That is, lion and hyena both are carnivore animals which are feeding on to the a smaller other vertebrate or organism which acts as a food or which serves as a food or a prey for the both lion and hyena. So whenever there is a lion readily present in the particular place, so this will create the problem for the hyena to feed in the respective place. So there is a competition between the lion and hyena. So they are not competing directly with one another. So, but the negative impact on the both is that there is a reduction in a number or a decrease in a number of a prey organism in the particular area or the ecosystem. So both the individuals or both the species of the both the species of the competitive interaction, that is lion and hyena, are negatively affected. That is, there is a reduction or decrease in a number of a prey organism in the particular area. Both are getting negatively affected. Both will uh, have a problem. Both will have a problem for getting the food resource or the food organism or the prey in the particular region because of reduction or decrease in a number of the prey organisms. So, competitive interactions are the interactions involving two or more species and which are sharing or using the same resource or the food resource, and in these interactions both the species involved are negatively affected. Competitive interactions may be indirect. Competitive interactions may be indirect, such as when two species both consume the same resource or the same prey but do not directly interact with each other. Instead, they affect each other by reducing the availability of the food resource. So, whenever there is a lion, for example, whenever there is a lion in the respective place or in a particular place where the hyena is supposed to predate or feed, but due to presence of lion in the particular place, hyena cannot go in the particular place for feeding onto the particular prey organism, and thus this is the indirect competition. This is a indirect competition, or this is the indirect interaction between the lion and hyena. So there is a decrease due to this type of interaction. There is a decrease in a number of prey organisms, and thus affecting negatively both the species, that is lion and hyena, affecting negatively in the particular area, because this is a competition type of interaction where two or more species get involved, and whatever the species getting involved in the competition interaction are negatively affected. Interaction may be direct or indirect. This is because whatever the species interacting in a particular area or in the ecosystem and sharing or utilizing the same food resource, then this type of interaction will lead to the reduction or decrease in a number of prey organisms. Even though one predator like hyena will have a problem so as to reach and so as to catch or feed on the particular prey because of presence of lion in the respective place previously. So one species may have trouble for hunting in an area where other is already present. So this is showing the indirect interaction. This is the indirect competition for the particular prey. This is the indirect interaction between the lion and hyena, which are using or feeding on the same prey or a same food resource, and thus this represents an example of indirect competitive interaction between the lion and hyena. Then second type of interaction, consumer resource interactions. Consumer resource interactions. So consumer resource interactions are the interactions in which individuals from one species consume the individuals of another species. Consumer resource interactions. Consumer resource interactions are the interactions in which the individuals of the one species consume the individuals of another species. For example, in this case, the example of this type of interaction includes predator-prey interaction. Predator-prey interaction. So in this case, one organism or the one individual or one species which consume the individual of the another species, where one serves or acts as a predator and other species act as a prey. So example of this type of interaction include predator-prey interaction, predator-prey interaction, and herbivore plant interaction So these are the two examples of the consumer resource interaction. That is predator prey, one species or the organism of one species acts as a predator, and another a species of the organism acts as a prey. So predator prey interactions or herbivore and plant interactions. These consumer resource interactions affect the species involved in different ways. Usually, this type of interaction has a positive impact on the consumer species and a negative impact on the resource species. So in this case, what is the result of the competitive competition between the consumer and resource? What is the result or the effect of the consumer resource interaction? That is, consumer species will be benefited, or consumer species will have the positive impact, and the resource species have negative impact, or resource species have the loss. Resource species will have a loss, and the consumer species have a gain or a benefit or a positive impact. So usually, this type of interaction has a positive impact on the consumer species and the negative impact on the resource species. Means in this case, in first example, that is a predator and prey interaction. The predator is a consumer and prey is a resource. In first example, the predator is a consumer and prey is the resource. So, as per the statement, the predator or the consumer having positive impact or get benefited because it will get a food in the form of prey. So, it is a positive impact on the consumer species and the negative impact on the prey species. Predator species will have positive impact and prey species have the negative impact or a loss because it get died, it get killed. Predator predating or feeding upon the prey, so ultimately will lead into the death of the prey. So here resource species will have negative impact or a loss. In another example, herbivore. So the herbivore animals which are feeding on to the plant materials. So herbivore are the consumers which are getting a food source from the plant species. The herbivore species which are the consumer species which are feeding on to the plants or plant species. So here herbivores are consumers and consumer will have a positive impact or a benefit from the resource species, that is plant species, where the plants are used or consumed by the herbivore animals. So the plant species will have negative impact. The plant species have the negative impact or a loss. So plant number of the plant of the respective species ultimately get decreased with respect to their number or their quantity. So quantity or the number of the plant species will be decreased due to the feeding of the herbivore type of consumer on the plant species. So in this case, consumer species have the positive impact. In case of consumer resource interactions, the interaction taking place between the two species, that is one species of the consumer and other species, that is a resource. One species serves as a consumer species and another species serves as a resource. So for example, predator and prey interaction or herbivore and plant interaction. So in case of predator and prey interaction, predator is a consumer predating or feeding on or consuming the prey animal. So ultimately, the predator or the consumer will have a gain or a benefit or have a positive impact of the interaction, and the prey animals or the organisms have negative impact or have a loss. Prey organisms have a loss, or in this interaction, the prey animals get killed. While in case of another example, that is herbivore and plant interaction, so herbivore animals which are feeding on to the plant species, here herbivores are consumer feeding on to the plant species and ultimately having positive impact that they gain the food, they get a food from the plant species, and thus herbivore or the consumer species will have positive impact or get benefited, while the plant species which are the resource, and the number or quantity of the plant species will get decreased. So this is a loss of resource, means there is a negative impact on the resource species. So this is what about the consumer and resource interactions. For example, for example, uh, a consumer resource interaction would be a lion eating zebra. An example of consumer resource interaction, an example of consumer resource interaction would be a lion eating a zebra. So lion is a predator, zebra is a prey. Or zebra feeding on a grass, where zebra is a consumer and a grass is a resource. So in this example, the zebra is a resource. In the first example, the zebra is resource, lion is a predator. Lion is a predator eating a zebra. So lion is a predator and zebra is a prey. Lion is a consumer and zebra is a resource or the food. Getting it? So an example of consumer resource interaction would be a lion eating a zebra. So lion is a predator, zebra is a prey, lion is a consumer, and zebra is a resource. Or a zebra feeding on the grass. In second example, in first example, the zebra is a resource or a food or a prey, while in second example, it is a consumer. Zebra is a consumer feeding onto the grass. So this is the example of the consumer resource interactions. So in the same example, that is lion, zebra and the grass. Lion and zebra serves as a predator and prey interaction, or showing predator and prey interaction between the lion and zebra and grass represents second example, that is herbivore and plant interactions. So we have explained the example of this type of interaction, that is consumer resource interaction, which includes predator prey interaction and herbivore plant interactions, and its example is a lion, zebra and the grass. So in first example, lion acts as a consumer and zebra as a resource or a prey. In second example, zebra serves as a consumer or herbivore and the grass as a plant species or a resource. Then third type of interaction, detritor detritivous interactions. Detritor detritus interactions. Detritor means the living organisms which are feeding onto the detritus, that is dead and decaying organic matter or decomposing material of the plant or animal origin. So whatever the organic substances or the materials originating from the plants and animal resources called as a detritus. So dead and decaying organic matter, dead and decaying organic matter of the plant and animal origin is called as a detritus. And the detritivores means the organisms or the animals which are feeding onto the detritus. So this is the third type of interaction, animal interaction, that is detritivore detritus interaction. Detritivore means the living organisms which are predating or feeding or consuming detritus, that is dead and decaying organic matter, of plant or animal origin. So detritivore detritus interactions involve a species that consumes the detritus. So detritus interaction involves a species of animals that consumes or feed on the detritus of another species. Detritus means detritus means dead or decaying or decomposing organic matter. So detritus interactions involve a species of organism, a species of animal that consumes or feeds on the detritus of another species. This interaction is a positive interaction. This interaction is a positive interaction for the consumer species. This interaction is having a positive impact. This interaction is having a positive interaction or a positive impact on the consumer species or for the consumer species. It has no impact on the resource. It has no impact, that is no negative or no positive. It has no impact on the resource species. It has, and since the resource is a detritus, detritus is a dead and decaying organic matter. So it is readily dead. It is already dead. So in this interaction, that is detritus interaction involving a species of organism that consumes or feed on the detritus of another species, and this interaction is a positive interaction for the consumer species. Means there is a positive impact of the interaction on the consumer species, and it has no impact on the resource species, and it has no impact on the resource species, because the resource is a detritus. Since the detritus, it is already dead material. Since it is already dead, so whatever the species of organism which has readily dead and which undergoes its decay or decomposition, that will be used by the consumer species. So there is no impact on the resource or the detritus species, since it is already dead. Detritivores include detritivores includes means the animals which are feeding onto the detritus, that is dead and decaying organic material, includes small creatures, means small organisms such as millipedes, sludges, sludge, that is snails, sludges, wood lice, and sea cucumbers. So these are the some of the examples of the small creatures or the small invertebrates which are feeding on to the detritus material or dead and decaying organic matter, which is usually found in the bottom of the water bodies or on the surface of the land, which is containing dead and decaying matter or material in the form of humus. So, the detritivores include the small creatures such as millipedes, sludges, wood lice, and the sea cucumbers, which are occurring in a different habitat, maybe terrestrial habitat or the aquatic habitat or the ecosystem. By cleaning up decomposing plant and animal matter, they play an important role in maintaining the health of ecosystem. Means the benefit or this type of or advantage of detritive or detritus type of interaction is to the ecosystem. So whatever the ecosystem or the habitat where these detritus material or dead and decaying organic materials are present, which are utilized by the detritivores, and this will lead to the cleaning activity, that is a cleaning up. So cleaning or removal or the elimination of the decomposing plant and animal matter. The detritivores play an important role in maintaining the cleanliness or the health of the ecosystem. So this is uh, the animal interaction, that is the detritivore and the detritus interaction, but is very advantageous for the ecosystem itself, because the dead and decaying organic matter or the materials can lead to a pollution or the harmful effect onto the ecosystem. So detritivore organisms, even though they are small creatures which are feeding on the detritus material, here the detritivores or these small creatures will have the positive impact of the interaction, that is a detritive or detritus interaction in the ecosystem, and these detritivores playing the important role in cleaning of the ecosystem by removing or feeding or cleaning the detritus material from the ecosystem. So this is very advantageous or the useful as far as this is the advantageous or the useful type of interaction. Detritivore detritus interaction is having positive impact onto the detritivore or the consumer category, and there is no impact on the detritus because the detritus material is derived from the dead bodies of the plants and animals, so which are already dead. So there is no any impact on the detritus. But the detritivore will also play the important role in cleaning up of the detritus material, which is which may be harmful for the ecosystem. So this will help in maintaining the health of or cleanliness of the ecosystem. So the detritivores cleaning up the decomposing plant and animal matter, and they play important role in maintaining the health of ecosystem. Then fourth type of interactions, that is mutualistic interactions. Fourth type of animal interaction, that is mutualistic or mutualism type of interactions or the relationship or the association. So in this type of interaction, both species of the resource and the consumers are benefited. Mutualistic interactions, in this type of interaction, both the species of resource and the consumer are benefited from the interaction. For example, relationship between the plants and pollinators. So this is a well-known example or a good example of mutualistic interaction or the association between the plants and the pollinators. For example, relationship between the plants and the pollinators. So most of the flowering plants which depends on the animals for the pollination, that is the transfer of pollen from anther to stigma. So transport or the transfer of anthers, that is male part of the flower, anthers to the stigma, that is the female part of the flower. So most of the flowering plants are dependent upon the variety of animals for the purpose of or function of the pollination, that is fertilization of the flowers, transfer of pollens to the stigma. So and so as to facilitate the cross pollination. So example of mutualistic interaction, that is the relationship between plants and pollinators. Plants and pollinators. Most of the flowering plants, most of the flowering plants depends on the animals like insects for pollination, and in exchange for this service of cross pollination, the animals or insects like honeybees, butterflies, they get a food in the form of pollen grains or the nectar. So this is a mutualism type of interaction. Both the species of the animals or the association or the interaction get benefited. So the plant species or the flowering plant species get benefited for the service of cross pollination by the insect species like honeybees or the butterflies. These are the insects which are feeding onto the variety of flowers or the plants so as to get the pollen or nectar. But in return, they can provide a free service of cross pollination of the flowers. So, in return, the insects providing the service of cross pollination to the flowering plants, and the flowering plants will provide the pollen grains and the nectar as a food source to the insects which are moving from flower to flower and providing the free service of cross pollination. So this is the mutualism or mutualistic interactions. In this type of interaction, both species of the interaction, that is a resource, that is a plant flowering plant species, and the consumers, that is insect species, are benefited. So in this type of interaction, both species of resource and the consumer are benefited from the interaction. And for example, relationship between the plants and pollinators. So most of the flowering plants which are depending on the animals like insects, like honeybees and butterflies for the cross pollination of the flowers. And in exchange or in return for the service of cross pollination to the animals such as butterflies and honeybees, they get feed, they get food in the form of pollen grain or the nectar. The interaction is beneficial for both species of plants and animals. So mutualistic interaction or this type of interaction is beneficial for both species, that is the resource or consumer, that is a plant and the animals, like the flowering plants and the animal species such as honeybee species or the various species of the butterflies which are uh, feeding onto the variety of flowers on of the flowering plants. So this is about the mutualistic interactions. So these are the four type of animal interactions such as uh, competitive interactions, then consumer resource interaction, detritive or detritus interaction, and the mutualistic interactions. So this is about the different type of animal interactions. Next time we'll continue with the next point, that is competition. So today we'll stop here, and tomorrow we'll continue the competition, that is intraspecific and interspecific competition. So there are different type of competitions. So tomorrow we'll explain about the competition, uh, that is interspecific and intraspecific competition. So with this, today we'll stop here. Thank you.